A historic collapse unfolding before the cameras. A prime minister dragged from Parliament like a delinquent. An entire nation unable to believe its eyes. What unfolded that noon in Westminster was not merely a scene of fury. It was the symbol of a political empire crumbling before the people's gaze. The images spread worldwide. Keir Starmer, the man who promised stability, being escorted by security as Nigel Farage, impassive, watched on like someone witnessing the end of an era. 3 centuries of British tradition shattered in seconds. No king, no prime minister, no adversary had been humiliated like this since the days of absolute monarchy. And it all began with a simple provocation. 7 words that set the House of Commons ablaze and exposed, on national television, the utter exhaustion of London's elite. The people, watching their screens, saw not just a politician in crisis, but the reflection of an entire system in collapse. According to sources inside Parliament, the atmosphere that morning was already tense, but no one imagined what was to come. Starmer entered with a rigid expression, confident he would face just another session of routine criticism. But Nigel Farage was not there for another political charade. He came armed with figures, reports, and what he called irrefutable evidence of betrayal against British sovereignty. Leaked documents suggested Starmer's cabinet had held secret talks with Brussels about potentially rejoining EU migration schemes, a deal that, if confirmed, would reverse parts of Brexit without any public consultation. Silence fell like a shroud over the chamber. Farage spoke calmly, measured, almost surgical. Meanwhile, the cameras captured the Prime Minister's face, transforming. What began as discomfort turned to rage, and that rage, broadcast live, became the spark for an unprecedented implosion in British political history. And then, before millions of viewers, the unthinkable happened. Starmer lost control. He shouted, gestured wildly, stormed across the chamber like a man possessed. "How dare you!" he bellowed, his voice cracking with fury. His face red, eyes wide, veins bulging in his neck. Seasoned MPs, used to fierce debates, stood paralyzed. The Speaker himself, Lindsay Hoyle, seemed incredulous. The British Prime Minister, the man who should embody British composure, was putting on a display of desperation for the world to see. Insiders say aides tried to calm him, but he ignored them all. "This man is a poison to the United Kingdom," he screamed, pointing at Farage. The scene was so surreal that, for a moment, it seemed like a Shakespearean tragedy. The ruler, faced with the truth, losing his mind. And it was there, in that instant of chaos, that Starmer's authority died. The sound that echoed next will be etched in British memory. Standing Order 43. 3 cold, ancient words that rang like a death sentence. The Speaker, firm, declared the Prime Minister out of control and ordered his immediate removal. It was the first time in over 300 years that this rule had been invoked against a head of government. The cameras showed security approaching. The chamber fell silent. Starmer, pale, disbelieving. "You cannot do this," he muttered. And Hoyle replied, with the serenity of someone carrying the Constitution in his voice. "I can, and I will. This Parliament is not a stage for personal attacks." It was over. 2 officers placed their hands on the Prime Minister's shoulders and led him out, under relentless flashes. Outside, reporters shouted questions, but the Prime Minister had no words left. In that moment, the man who claimed to be a defender of democracy was literally expelled from the heart of democracy. The symbol of British power became a symbol of collapse, and as chaos engulfed Parliament, Nigel Farage remained standing, serene, impassive, almost theatrical. According to accounts, he never raised his voice. He waited for silence to take hold, and then said, gravely, "This is what happens when a leader loses touch with the people." It was as if each word carried the weight of an entire frustrated generation. The image of the contrast, Starmer being dragged away and Farage standing firm, the British flag behind him, spread in seconds. Within an hour, the video had millions of views. Prime Minister thrown out became the world's most talked about hashtag. On the radio, in pubs, in squares, the question was the same. How did the man who promised to unite the country end up crumbling on live television? And as the government fell silent, the people reacted with a mix of shock and relief. For the first time in a long time, many Britons felt that someone, finally, had stood up to the system. The following hours were a political earthquake. According to local think tanks, the video of Starmer's collapse broke records even Churchill's speeches never reached. Within 5 hours, it was on every news broadcast worldwide, from New York to Sydney. The foreign press called it the collapse of British composure, while London commentators spoke openly of a leadership crisis. Inside the Labour Party, panic was total. Insider reports described aides in tears, ministers avoiding each other in the corridors, and MPs scrambling to delete their posts of support for the Prime Minister. Starmer's popularity plunged 15 points in a single day, the largest collapse ever recorded for a sitting leader. The contrast was brutal. As the government hid, Farage seized the vacuum, giving interviews, visiting radio stations, presenting himself as the calm man amid the chaos. And this image, repeated, shared, exalted, began to reshape British politics forever. The next morning, the country woke up divided, but for the first time not between left and right. It was between those who still believed in the system and those who saw it as a total farce. According to BBC polls, over 60% of Britons said they felt national shame watching their Prime Minister lose control. Only 19% defended Starmer, and many of those with reservations. On the streets, ordinary citizens commented with a mix of anger and irony. If he can't keep his cool in Westminster, how can he negotiate with Moscow or Washington? That phrase became a meme, a headline, even a T-shirt slogan. Meanwhile, the Labour Party plunged into internal strife. Veteran MPs accused Starmer of tarnishing the country's image. Younger parliamentarians tried to justify it by saying he was too human. But the damage was done. The UK, accustomed to the almost ritualistic composure of its leaders, now found itself facing something unprecedented. A Prime Minister turned into a global joke. And before we go on, if you want to follow every twist and turn and get the next bombshells firsthand, subscribe now and hit like. It shows you're on the side of unfiltered information and helps me bring you more data and insider details in the coming hours. Because what comes next is even more unbelievable. In the 24 hours after the scandal, sources close to Buckingham Palace reportedly expressed deep concern about government stability. According to backroom rumors, royal advisers were even studying possible institutional containment measures if Parliament fell into paralysis. And that's unprecedented. When the monarchy itself starts to move, it's a sign the system is in collapse. Conservative newspapers openly spoke of a constitutional crisis. Radio shows received hundreds of calls from military veterans demanding the restoration of order and national dignity. The outrage was not just political, it was almost spiritual. In the eyes of many, the UK had lost something sacred, the composure that sustained its civilization. Before we continue, if you want to follow every twist in this story and get the next political bombshells firsthand, subscribe to the channel and hit like. It shows you're on the side of unfiltered truth and helps this work continue to bring you the insider stories and analyses that the mainstream media tries to hide. Every new subscriber makes a difference. And in the next few hours, I can guarantee you, there are revelations coming that will send Westminster into panic. So click the button and join me, because what happens next is simply unbelievable. As the government hid behind closed doors, Farage launched his attack with surgical precision. At a press conference outside Parliament, his words echoed like a historic speech. What we saw yesterday was not just a fit of rage. It was the moral collapse of a government that betrayed the people. The crowd applauded. Journalists tried to interrupt, but he continued unperturbed, citing numbers, statistics, and impactful phrases that seemed carefully calculated to strike at the heart of the forgotten British electorate. The common worker. As Starmer became a symbol of instability, Farage embodied the opposite, the calm, firm man who speaks his mind and confronts the system head-on. Within hours, the Reform UK website crashed under the weight of traffic. Memberships soared. Millionaire donors, once cautious, now saw in Farage a real opportunity to seize power. The country watched, open-mouthed, as a near-mystical transfer of political energy took place. The old establishment was beginning to crumble. The reaction within the Labour Party was a spectacle of desperation. Insiders revealed that ministers had even discussed collective resignation to force Starmer out. Angela Rayner, his deputy, reportedly shouted in a meeting, "He has dragged us into global ridicule." The mood was mutinous. Meanwhile, newspapers around the world ran the image of the Prime Minister being expelled, and each replay was an open wound. The Financial Times spoke of institutional implosion. The Telegraph called for early elections, and The Guardian tried, in vain, to defend the leader. Even close allies began to distance themselves publicly. In Downing Street, aides resigned one by one, leaving behind an empty cabinet and an isolated Prime Minister. The UK, which had celebrated stability just months before, now faced a political and moral storm, and as chaos consumed the government, the Conservative opposition watched in strategic silence, waiting for the right moment to deliver the final blow. The Red Empire had begun to bleed. Behind the scenes, the consequences were even deeper than the public could imagine. According to constitutional analysts, the Speaker's decision to expel a Prime Minister set an irreversible precedent. This changes the balance of power in the UK, warned a former Supreme Court judge. For the first time, questions arose over whether the government leader could continue to govern after being formally removed for misconduct. Meanwhile, foreign diplomats demanded explanations, especially from the Commonwealth, where the episode was seen as a sign of political weakness. Australia, Canada, and New Zealand issued statements calling for immediate stability. Inside the country, economists warned that the pound was plummeting and investors were pulling capital out of London. The disaster was no longer just political. It was financial. And for the ordinary citizen, all that remained was shame. Many saw in that outburst of rage the exact portrait of a government disconnected from reality, given over to the arrogance and moral collapse of the London elite. But as the establishment floundered, Farage turned chaos into political capital. His team launched a campaign called Reclaim Britain, which toured the country at record speed. Each rally was a cinematic event. Flags waving, videos of Starmer's collapse playing on big screens, crowds chanting, "Take back control," with almost religious fervor. According to internal polls leaked by sources close to Reform UK, the party had already surged to 23% in voting intentions, a number unthinkable just weeks before. In working-class areas of the North, former Labour voters now cheered for Farage. "At least he says what he feels," they said in street interviews. Meanwhile, the Westminster elite went into denial. BBC analysts admitted that something profound has changed in the national psyche. For the first time in decades, the people saw a man challenge the system and win. Starmer's collapse was no longer just a scandal. It had become the landmark of a new popular revolt, uniting patriotism, fatigue, and a desire for national revival. The pressure reached its peak 3 weeks after the incident. Labour MPs began sending formal letters of no confidence to the party leadership. Insiders reveal that over 50 had already been sent, enough to trigger an internal challenge. Late-night TV programs displayed panels with the growing count of betrayals, while columnists speculated about who would take over. Wes Streeting, Yvette Cooper, and even David Lammy began maneuvering behind the scenes. And Starmer? In absolute silence. No interviews, no public appearance. His closest allies said he needed time, but the country was no longer waiting for explanations. It was waiting for a replacement. Labour, which had promised stability and competence, had become the picture of disorder. Polls showed 72% of Britons saying Starmer had shamed the country. And on the other side, Farage smiled in international headlines, described as the voice of discipline and tradition. The political game had turned completely, and so we reached the point of no return. What began as a fit of rage became a political earthquake that redrew the map of British power. Starmer, the man who sold himself as a symbol of rationality, became the face of instability. The left lost control of the narrative, and the people, tired of excuses and scandals, turned to those who spoke of sovereignty, honor, and tradition. A prime minister who cannot control himself cannot control the country. The tabloids and pub speeches now repeat. And most impressively, according to the latest polls, Nigel Farage is now the second favorite to occupy Downing Street. The UK, more than divided, is in turmoil. What happened that day in Westminster was not just an individual collapse, it was the end of an era. The globalist elite felt the blow, and the people, for the first time in decades, felt hope. The question echoing now is simple and explosive. Are we about to see the first reform UK government in history? Because if there's one thing certain, it's that the kingdom will never be the same.